All right. Thank you so much, Anthony and Cafe Culture Northeast, for hosting this event and inviting us to participate. Joe, thank you for joining me for this conversation. And also thank you for creating and publishing this book. I know that it took a lot of work. I know that it was very hard, but this is an incredible book, really important and great to be able to talk about. So,
Yeah.
hello.
Hello, thanks. The book needed to happen. This is a book which time had come, probably long overdue. But before we get into it, Anthony, thanks as well, and to Cafe Culture for organizing this. Jeff and I actually did sort of a pre-talk last week, and I think we talked for about 2 hours. We'd like to start our own
Yeah.
series on animals in the Anthropocene, so we'll do what we can in this half hour allocated.
This might be pretty tight, but we will do the best we can, and then we can do some more in the Q&A, and then we are both available for more conversation, I imagine, after this session too. So maybe we could start by talking a little bit about the book and about the idea of animal photojournalism, which informs the book. So this is, of course, a really interesting kind of book, because this is, on the one hand, incredibly beautiful, and on the other hand, incredibly horrifying, and not the type of book one would normally place prominently on a coffee table and invite people to look at it at dinner party. So I was wondering if you could start just by saying a little bit about what informed your approach to the book, and how you approach the aesthetics of the book, and what you hope people will take away from it.
Yeah, it's unusual to a lot of people who aren't immersed in the photo world and in the world of conflict photography and photojournalism, but this is what we do. We want to publish our work in book format to give the subject matter the weight and the historic weight that it deserves. And the book was inspired by James Noctoy, who's a really famous horror photographer. There's a film on him called Horror Photographer. And he published this tome, this absolute beast of a book. And it was just decades of his work on genocide and all sorts of crimes and war and famine. It's human induced. And when I saw that, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do for animals, that animals deserved something of this weight as well. I also knew that I couldn't do it on my own. I've shot in over 60 countries, but a lot of other people are doing this work well and doing it in a really strong and fantastic way. More than ever, in fact. Animal photography, animal rights photography used to be a lot of, it looked like a lot of activist work with sort of a shaky handheld camera. They were activists first and photographers second, but that has really shifted. We're seeing activists become photographers specifically for this purpose. And we're also seeing professional photographers do animal photojournalism for this purpose. And so here we have it, 40 photographers later in a 320 page book.
Got it. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could say more about this combination of advocacy and photojournalism. I know that for a lot of people, when you try to combine advocacy and a profession of one kind or another, it can introduce either actual or apparent tensions in terms of what you should be doing and how you should be approaching your work. For example, in academia, in standard journalism, people tend to think that you should be objective in the sense of being neutral. And insofar as you approach your work as an activist or advocate, it introduces a subjective or partisan bias, and it undercuts the seriousness of your work. I wonder if you feel those actual or apparent tensions in this case, or are there different expectations about how you should be approaching your work, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, especially in animal rights, in the animal rights sphere, because, well, first of all, there's the tension in journalism between subjective and objective in that decades-long conversation. I don't think that ultimately a lot of journalism can be objective. I mean, as a photographer, we go into a story because we care about it, because we're interested, because we actually want to affect an outcome. So there's that whole conversation, and I know you have a lot in your world of academia as well. But yeah, you're coming up an even higher wall when it comes to the animal rights message that is actually quite inherent in animal photojournalism. And I've had a lot of doors closed on me because they feel like, oh, here comes the most subjective person or someone who is emotional. Also, I happen to be a woman who, therefore the stacks are like even higher against me because I am probably just an emotional female animal rights activist. Nevertheless, animal rights activists are covering issues that are really important because the individuals are sentient and suffering and therefore deserving of visibility and deserving of respect and care. So yeah, total uphill battle, but that's really changing, which is really exciting. These days, we're seeing a lot of doors open in mainstream media and in global conversations about there being a space to cover the hidden animals, which is who are the animals in this book. Maybe we should go there. Who are the hidden animals?
Yeah, we will definitely go there in this conversation. But I want to stick with this idea of animal photojournalism a little bit more. First of all, I agree with you that there is no such thing of objectivity understood as neutrality. We absolutely have to bring our own subjective perspectives to questions about what to work on and how to approach it and so on and so forth. And our biases will of course shape that. And that should be something that we make explicit and accept rather than trying to ignore. So yeah, I completely agree with you about that. And I love that you are creating this space to combine advocacy and photojournalism and animal photojournalism. I wanted to invite you to say a little bit more about gender. I know that in general you work on this issue in animal advocacy. For example, you co-founded the Unbound Project, which celebrates the role of women in animal advocacy. And so maybe you could say a little bit about that project and also a little bit more about how you see gender as playing a role in your work. For example, does it create extra obstacles because people assume that a conflict photojournalist has to be like a rugged man, like, hunkered in a bunker, dodging shrapnel, taking photographs of wars. And if you in various ways subvert that stereotype, you must not be a serious, true conflict journalist. You must be doing something more emotional or sentimental or something like that.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, can you believe that women can actually go to war zones and do serious work? I mean, let's even step back and define serious work, but let's not.
Right.
But, throughout my career, absolutely, I'm in a very male-dominated industry, especially in conflict work, wildlife work, even in my days of corporate work. Often people are like, oh, are you a friend of the client? Yeah, I'm a friend of the client. I'm not a professional.
Right, of course.
But I would say to your question about, our doors opening or closing to me as a woman, a female photographer, I would say that often they have closed to the editors whose doors I'm walking through. But not always, but more often than not. That's changing. As opportunities are being made for women globally in all sorts of spheres, which is great. But I will say that when it comes to the physical field work, sometimes the doors are more open because I'm not taken seriously as a woman. It's like, oh, well, she's, not a serious photographer at this bullfight or
so
at this factory
not as
farm.
much of a threat for the enterprise or something like that.
Yes.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ethical and political issues that might come up in your work. So there are a few that we can talk about, and maybe I can put them in the order from least to most concerning to me, and see what you think about them. So one concern that I think often arises in a situation where people have to confront suffering in the course of doing their job is that you have to some degree, emotionally detach yourself from the suffering that you encounter. And so you might use various distancing tools like gallows humor or other tools like that in order to emotionally protect yourself and make the work sustainable for you. But then when you do that, it carries the risk of coarsening you and your own attitudes to the victims of this suffering. Maybe you become a little bit more detached from the suffering over time. And so I just wonder if you find that is a tool that you have to make use of, and if you find that it does have those sorts of effects on your character and how you feel about that.
Yeah. Well, there are a few things there. I have learned to detach in a healthy way as opposed to an unhealthy way. That took time. I had to really immerse myself in the work and see how it felt and see how I was going to come out the other side. I care deeply about the subjects of my work. And so I think it goes without saying that anyone who's a little bit alive and breathing, slightly empathetic, is going to be affected by facing the animals, the subjects, the humans, whoever that you can't help. So I'm going in there to lessen suffering in the future. I know that's the role of my work, to document suffering so that others can see and change, and we can, ultimately get rid of these horrific industries. I can't help the individuals who are in front of me, which is very painful. What to do with that pain? Well, one of the things is to have, to look at your relationship with pain and suffering. And of course, we all go through it. We all lose people. We all get sick, and we all suffer in different ways. We're quite afraid of suffering. But the more you suffer and the more you see that you can get through it and work to get through it, the more you can carry it. At least that's the case with me. Mm. And not living in the suffering that I experienced when I witnessed the suffering of others. I don't live there. I have one short, precious human life, and I want to live it joyfully. And so I choose, and I had to learn to do that. I had to practice choosing to know that there are a lot of horrible things happening in the world, and to choose to live every day very happily. But that took practice. Mm-hmm. There's so much more to say here. You need to get me back on track.
No, this is great. But I am curious though, if you do find yourself doing any of the things that researchers report doing and other people report doing, for example, like cracking jokes on a photo shoot or those sorts of things to make it tolerable to be in the presence of this kind of tragedy.
Absolutely. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's definitely common amongst us photojournalists, and it is a coping tool, which is so interesting how humor, gallows humor, any kind of humor is like so fundamental to our humanity and to getting through things. Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, we have to find a way to make life tolerable. We live in a world with quintillions of non-human animals who are suffering all around us, and a lot of this suffering is human caused, and we have to confront that, and we have to do something about it. We have to dedicate our lives to confronting it and doing something about it. And we have to be patient and compassionate and understanding with ourselves, and create space for joy in life, and find a way to hold both of those things at the same time. And I agree, it creates a kind of cognitive dissonance, and it can create a sense of guilt for separating yourself from it enough so that you can enjoy life and not constantly feel guilty about that. But that does seem necessary.
The guilt doesn't help, and I had to learn that. I felt like in the beginning of this work, I felt, well, the animals are suffering at every single moment of every single day. The least I can do is suffer along with them and feel, feel right along with them. Now, that's not true. That'll burn me out. But when it is really important for me to feel is when I'm in the field facing them, when I am connecting with them and documenting their extremely unfortunate lives. That is when my heart is wide open. I often find myself just whispering under my breath, like, I'm sorry. I've been filmed many times doing my work, and I don't even know I'm doing it. I'm just whispering, I'm sorry. And also I'm going to get the best possible pictures if my heart's wide open, and if I'm open to that suffering. And that has worked. What else works for me with handling my own suffering is putting it into action, creating books like this, mentoring people, talking about animal photojournalism. If these images were just sitting on my hard drive, I probably would have quit long ago. So I encourage people to take small steps forward with what you have done, whatever your activism is, just like have a quick progression if you can, but at the very least have a very slow progression towards doing something meaningful with what you've learned and what you've seen.
Yeah, got it. So that is connected to a separate, in my view, more concerning ethical issue, which is, how do you decide whether and when and how to intervene in what appears to be preventable suffering? Obviously, if you go to a farm, or for that matter, to a bushfire, you are not going to be able to personally save or spare every animal you come across. nor should you aspire to do that. But probably there are opportunities to save a life, and then probably a lot of things must be going through your mind. One is this trade-off between documenting the suffering so that you can share that with other people and hopefully affect change for the future, versus intervening in the suffering and saving the life of this individual animal. And then another must just be the practicality of it. Can you in fact save this animal and do more good than harm for the animal? What costs would there be for you in terms of like legal liability, or just the financial costs or the emotional costs?
All of that.
So how do you think about those? And are there cases where you feel tempted, or where you actually do intervene to reduce suffering, or do you really just on a principled grounds focus on documenting the suffering?
It's so tempting to just start here by saying it really bugs me when people actually attack me for not rescuing animals. It's like, how much do you want from me? I've gone so far, and I have spent so much money to like create documents that will move the world and affect change. So obviously I want to help all of the individuals in front of me. That's why I do this work, because I care so much about them. It's awful to leave anyone behind, but down to the practicality of it, as you mentioned several times here, Jeff. I'm in a foreign country. I'm with a couple of people. I'm going from place to place. Yeah, it's generally not feasible. I have to focus on doing the best possible job I can as a documentarian. I may only have 20 minutes inside of a barn before we have to run for it. And trust me, we often have to run for it because we're doing, we're trespassing when what we're doing is illegal. Luckily, I have photographed a lot of open rescues, which has been lovely. It's been good for my soul. Yeah, I can't save most of the animals I meet, but every time I shoot, it's yet another promise that I'm making to them and to myself to do as much as I can with their suffering. Ugh, so like so painful to even say that. I will say at one point, I have been able to rescue animals, but this I'll give one example. I was photographing inside of a big garbage bin, as we do, as one does as an investigator. You look at everywhere, and when you leave, you always look in the dumps, and there's always bodies. So I was at a rabbit farm, and there were clear garbage bags full of bodies, hundreds of bodies of white rabbits, but suffocating in one of those garbage bags, still alive, was a rabbit who they had thrown out, who was not yet dead, and they didn't even bother. And so I opened the garbage bag and I rescued the rabbit. The poor rabbit was trying to burrow itself deeper into the bodies of the other animals there. It was so absolutely depressing, but we were able to rescue that rabbit, the team and I, and bring that rabbit to vet care. But you mentioned the problems that can arise as a result of me doing that, like financial, legal. So I could have been charged for that. Also theft of like a dying animal that they threw out. Yeah, it's insane. Like there's so much that needs to change. Oh my God, we haven't even talked about ag-gag laws yet, and how in the US, if I do some of this work, I could be charged under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. Like, you know, there's all this.
Should we take a moment to talk about that? It might be that not everybody is aware. So
Please.
In the US, there are state-based and federal laws that make it the case that if people are torturing animals in factory farms and slaughterhouses, and an undercover investigator or a whistleblower bravely documents this horrific treatment of animals and then shares it with the media or other people, that the only criminal act in that entire sequence was the act of documenting and disseminating that information. So ag laws basically criminalize at the state level the act of capturing and sharing information about what goes on in these facilities, because they're understood to be private facilities and people are sharing private information with the public. And the Federal Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act basically makes it the case that you can be prosecuted as a terrorist in the United States for essentially breaking the law in an effort to advocate against animal enterprise, businesses that profit from harming animals. And so these are major obstacles in the way of the kind of work that Jo does. How has that changed your work over time? Do you find yourself limiting the things that you do in order to protect yourself and make sure that you can keep doing this work? Are there things that you might have used to do that you would be less likely to do now?
I do have to take these things into consideration depending on the country that I'm in. I always make myself aware of what the laws are. Some places you get caught on a farm and they can hold you in a pen somewhere without reaching out to, without your one phone call, for a week. Whereas some countries will, give you a fine. So it's really good to be informed. No, it's not really good. It's essential that you be informed if you're doing this work. Yeah, right. Let people know where you are. It has tempered my work in some U.S. states for sure. However, has it stopped me from doing my work generally? Not at all. It's a really big world. There is animal suffering, unfortunately, happening at every turn. So there's a lot of places to go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Back to the rabbit. So you did in fact rescue this rabbit, and what happened after that? Were you able to take the rabbit to a sanctuary or rescue or otherwise get them care?
Yes, we were able to get them care. We brought the little male rabbit home, and he was given medicine and everything he needed to recover. So.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, for the record, and I hope this was clear, I am absolutely in agreement with you that you should not feel responsible for saving all of these lives that you come across. I do think though, and I'm curious if you agree or disagree with me, I do sometimes feel bothered when I see documentary filmmakers or photographers who are nature photographers and who capture, for example, natural or seemingly natural wild animal suffering, and who think on principle that they have no responsibility to intervene, or that they have a responsibility not to intervene because this is natural, this is the way nature is supposed to be. And that kind of reasoning bothers me a little bit. I certainly appreciate why you would want to be cautious and humble about intervening in complex systems that you might not fully understand, because your interventions really could do more harm than good, and you should of course take that possibility into account. But to not intervene just because the suffering is natural, part of nature, and in some sense the way the world intended it to be, to me it erases the animals as individual sentient beings with lives of their own who should be considered as valuable for their own sake. I mean, if you were walking down the street, this is the kind of thing a philosopher would say, but if you were walking down the street and you saw a child drowning in a pond, and you could rescue that child without sacrificing anything significant, you would feel some urge to rescue that child, because you would recognize that even if the suffering is in some sense natural, this is also a vulnerable life at stake, and you have the power to do something about it. But with respect to non-human animals, and especially farmed animals or wild animals, we psychologically place them in a different category and don't think about them that way. We think about them as parts of species and ecosystems, completely fungible and interchangeable, rather than individuals whose lives are valuable for their own sakes. And I do wish that we would be a little bit more willing to see them the same way we see the drowning child, and intervene when we feel like we could, and it would do more good than harm for them. And it seems like that was the approach that you were taking when you rescued the rabbit. You thought, here is a case where it seems like it can do more good than harm, and we can care for this one particular individual without then feeling pressure to make that what you do all the time in more complicated cases. But yeah, so I'm curious if you agree or disagree with me about that.
Well, in the case of the rabbit, I was able to do that intervention also because I had already done the shoot. I wasn't sacrificing a documentary project that was going to educate a lot of people. So that was one aspect of it. But with this, nature photography and the documentation of, natural killing of other animals, my question is, why do we need to see that? I mean, that is a really solemn thing, watching a cheetah take down a gazelle or whatever. Like that is a really solemn thing. So why, it's almost like nature photography porn in some ways. I mean, it's why is it exciting to us? Why are we attracted to that? I think that, we should look at suffering if it is going to help those who are suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that Susan Sontag wrote about in her book regarding the pain of others. Who should look, and why should we look? So I do challenge wildlife photography that is kind of exploitative in that way.
That's really interesting. When you said, why are we looking? I had a sense of why we should be looking. I think people often underestimate how much wild animals do suffer. We think of wild animals as existing out in nature, and nature is untouched and beautiful and full of charismatic megafauna, elephants and giraffes basking in the sun, sipping from a lake, when in fact, of course, nature is full of non-human animals who are suffering and dying all the time as a result of hunger, thirst, illness, injury, parasitism, predation, and other natural and human caused and human amplified harms. And so I do think that we have a responsibility to attend to that, to see it, to internalize it, and to ask ourselves what, if anything, we should be doing about it, especially in those cases where human activity is complicit. On the other hand, I agree with you that that is not the spirit in which people generally create and consume nature photography and documentaries. They do it in this more voyeuristic way, or in this more, oh, hey, look at this chase sequence, and ooh, are they going to catch the animal or not? And ooh, look at that grisly kill. And that's not so much what I'm hoping people will take away from the reality of wild animal suffering.
This actually circles us back really well to animal photojournalism and what differentiates APJ, as we call it for short, from wildlife conservation. And APJ is a hybrid of conflict photography, conservation photography, but it's newsy, it's political, it's relevant to right now, and it does have a goal of creating change. It unabashedly has that goal, and that's okay. This is acceptable. Media
agreed.
out there, hello. And something else that is different about APJ is that it includes all animals, not just the charismatic megafauna. It includes the animals who, are relevant and important simply by virtue of existing, because they suffer. Everyone should be spared suffering as much as is humanly possible, especially when we are the cause of suffering. So let's end that. So animal photojournalism looks at the pigs in gestation crates and the hens in battery cages and so on, the monkeys, the mice, the fish in research labs. Right. Yeah, actually that leads to another related thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is whether animal photojournalism, or to what degree animal photojournalism is capable of capturing the harms that we can expect in the Anthropocene. So just to give some examples, and as a reminder to everyone participating in the conversation, the Anthropocene is roughly speaking understood as the new, by which I mean 400 to 600 years old, geological epoch defined primarily in terms of the impacts of human activity, and particularly human economic activity on the planet. So we now live in an age where humans and human economic activity are increasingly dominant and increasingly impacting the lives of many other animals. But philosophically, part of what makes, and morally and politically, part of what makes the Anthropocene such a challenging new kind of moral problem is that we can expect that the harms that most matter moving forward will be very different from the harms that most mattered in the past. In the past, the harms that most mattered were the harms that we caused each other directly, when people harmed and killed each other, and it was one person harming or killing another person, and it was all observable. But in the future, a lot of the harms that most matter are going to be harms that span species and nations and generations, that are caused by collectives, and then that impact collectives. And so the causal sequence might start in one country in one generation, and then impact individuals in another country in another generation. It happens at this huge scale where billions or trillions or quadrillions, quintillions of lives are at stake. So, that makes it really difficult just cognitively to wrap our minds around the scale of this harm and how complicit we are in it, because we can't trace those causal chains very easily.
And I imagine it might also create challenges for your work in animal photojournalism. And so I'll just ask you as a general matter, when it comes to capturing harms at scale, where very many lives are at stake, when it comes to capturing indirect harms, where the causal sequence starts here, the bad thing I do is over here, but then the victims are all the way over there. And then when it comes to all of these perhaps less charismatic victims, the insects, the reptiles, we might have a harder time identifying with or sympathizing with. How, if at all, do you think your kind of work is adequate to the task of drawing attention, raising awareness, inspiring empathy around those sorts of harms?
Yeah, well, let's start with charismatic. I mean, maybe the insects are only considered not charismatic because we don't know enough about them yet. The more we study, the more the field of ethology grows, the more we know that these are incredibly complex animals who are deserving of, their lives, their very own lives. When you learn things like the dung beetle charts its way at night by following the Milky Way, all sorts of incredible things. You might be less likely to step on one if you know that it's on a celestial mission. So charisma, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, chicken intelligence and the memory of pigs and sheep, and the fact that their senses function at a much higher caliber than ours do. We should be in awe of these animals. They can smell truffles 3 feet underground, pigs that is, all sorts of things. So we need to look at that. But when it comes to the difficulty of my work, piecing everything together, big scale, down to the individual, that's exciting for me because that's about storytelling, which is what I love to do. Photojournalists, by definition, are weaving together an essay with images. And so we're generally not interested in the one image, though of course it's important to get one image that really speaks to people, but it's more long-term work. It's about connecting the pieces of a puzzle. It's not just about animal rights, because that is a bit of a bubble, whereas, what we should be doing is connecting factory farming contributes to climate change. It contributes to the deforestation in the Amazon because we're burning down the Amazon to create, grazing space for cattle and to grow soy to feed cattle and all this nonsense. So it's big picture stuff. It's very collaborative. I can only do the work that I do because I work with NGOs globally. And because it's not just me, my project, was me with a camera for many years, but now we are a global photo agency and we're working with a lot of people. Storytelling, and also bringing it back to, well, how do these issues affect humans? Of course, we're very anthropocentric and we want to know what's in it for us. And there's a lot in it for us. We will be better people if we care more about others, if we stop eating the nonsense that we're eating. And if we, the more we stop harming others, the more we're going to have a flourishing ecosystem and world to live in.
Well, I agree. That is a very, very good answer as far as I am concerned. And we can see if other people are persuaded. We have a bunch of questions here. So I think now is maybe a good time to turn to a more general discussion. And as a reminder to everybody tuning in, I see that some people are posting in the Q&A and some people are posting in the chat. If you want us to potentially talk about your question, I would suggest posting it in the Q&A, because that is where I will be looking to ask some questions. And why don't we just go through as many as we can until we are at the end of the hour. Okay, cool. So Gordon asks, how much do you see your work as an art form? I suppose in contrast to journalism or advocacy or other ways that you could characterize it, how much do you see it as art?
Yeah, it is art. And that's something to really get your head around because of the general conception of the word art. It's something beautiful for the wall, but art is many things. And art is an act of resistance. It doesn't have to be traditionally beautiful. Art can be painful and poignant. To me, I would call what I do art because I am working to create in a frame a visual that is going to impact others. It's going to make them feel. And that is, you know, a lot of looking and framing and composing, and then what we do in the editing suite as well, like making sure the colors are perfect, and so that we can reach as many people as possible with that piece of art.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, it's always been an interesting conversation for photojournalists to describe what they do as art. But it is art made in this way that changes hearts and minds. I remember all the conversations I've heard from war photographers who have struggled over photographing bodies, genocides, and skulls, and people hacked up, and, like, you know, moving around them to find that perfect angle and to find the right light. I mean, it really makes us feel pretty messed up. It's but it is necessary in order to reach people.
Yeah, that was part of what I had in mind when I wondered if you have to create distance from your work, that there must be a lot of cognitive dissonance there, where on one hand, you want to be tuning into the suffering. On the other hand, you want to be getting the perfect shot and making sure the lighting and the framing are just right, and thinking about it formally and substantively at the same time is hard. And it just goes to show how complicated this set of norms is, because advocacy, journalism, and art all have their own norms, and there can be areas of overlap. And if you think about it creatively, you can find those areas of overlap and produce work that is excellent at one and the same time at being all three of those things. But that probably takes a lot of care and maybe a little bit of luck. That's really, really complicated and interesting.
And a lot of hard work. That's the thing about us APJs. You really need to go the distance, and you put a lot at risk psychologically, physically, emotionally. It takes practice, but it's so important. And I love that so many more people are doing it now. It's a quickly growing genre. And actually, so many people reach out to me about how to do this work that we created a masterclass. So they can go, anyone who's interested in learning about how I do what I do, just go to We Animals Media and click on the masterclass. And there's 8 episodes there that are self-guided.
Excellent. That's great to know. So we also have a question from Karen, who asks a couple of questions about legal advocacy for animals. So what is your opinion about using legal systems to secure non-human animal rights? For example, the work of Stephen Wise and the Non-Human Rights Project in the US, and who is approaching non-human rights from a legal perspective in Canada and the UK? So do you have anything you would like to say about that?
Just utter enthusiasm for the growth of animal law. Just like We Animals Media named animal photojournalism, and everyone all of a sudden felt at home with that. We're like, oh yeah, okay, this is a thing. And it's the same thing that happened with animal law a couple decades ago. They put a name on it and people are like, yes, this is a thing that needs to be flocked to. We have so many animal lawyers now. It's a growing field, and it's a very important piece of the puzzle, one of the most important. I put that way up there, along with plant-based innovations and cultured meat tech, all really, really important to change things. And in terms of Canada, so I would encourage people to follow Animal Justice. They are our largest animal law group here in Canada, and I'm not sure who's doing it in the UK, but I'm also a big fan of the ALDF, which is US-based but global, the Animal Legal Defense. I can add
a few things on the academic side, and this is an excuse to plug one of my own co-authored books. I worked with a group of philosophers on an amicus brief as part of a non-human rights project case on behalf of 2 chimpanzees, Kiko and Tommy, in New York, who were being held in solitary confinement. And we turned that amicus brief into a book called Chimpanzee Rights, which is all about the case for legal rights and legal personhood for non-human animals like chimpanzees. And sorry, my dog is asking for FOOD right now, so he might start to participate. And we used one of your photographs on the cover of the book. And then when we were hanging out like a year or so ago, I brought it up and you had forgotten that happened. And I had to go back and actually look at the book to make sure that it was actually your photograph. And it's a wonderful photograph. I'll add that the Canadian legal scholar Manisha Deka just released a new book about legal status for non-human animals in Canadian legal systems. And Alistair Cochrane is a wonderful legal political theorist working on those topics in the UK. So if you want to see academic work about that, you can go check out their work, and lots of other people's work for that matter. Okay, Nick asks, can we be concerned with animal welfare and still eat meat? Jo, what do you think?
You can be concerned about it, absolutely.
Yeah, my attitude is that in general in life, we should aspire to engage in harm reduction. So when we can reduce our complicity in harm without sacrificing our own basic interests and needs, then we should do that. So if you can be relatively happy and healthy eating a plant-based diet to the degree that you can do that, I think that you should, just like there are all sorts of other ways that you should aspire to not harm people or animals unnecessarily. But I also recognize that not everybody is able to do that, and to the degree that you need to be complicit in some amount of harm in order to survive, then that would of course be a different story. And of course, planet involves us in some degree of harm already. There is no way of existing in the planet that is totally harm-free. So the aspiration has to be to reduce and minimize the harm that we cause rather than eliminate it. I do think that for many of us, that means a largely or fully plant-based diet, but that might not be true for all of us. Would you agree or disagree with that response, Jo?
No, that was great. Yeah, do your best. I used to be a lot angrier than I am now. I remember, when I went vegan like 18 years ago, I just thought everyone could immediately go vegan. Just look at this picture, go vegan. Yeah, no, everyone is on a path, and I champion everyone who's taking steps on that path, the path of harm reduction. And it reminds me of the slogan for the sanctuary in Australia. It's called Edgar's Mission Sanctuary. And it's very simple. It's if we could live happy and healthy lives without harming others, why wouldn't we? And more than ever, it's easy and possible to not harm others.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. And of course, there are all sorts of other things we should be doing too. It maybe starts with what we do as consumers, but then should also include what we do in every other aspect of our lives. Ethics is complicated. Okay, here's a really interesting question from Yolanda. I'm studying animal biology and just recently discovered animal photojournalism. Yay! In the pictures you capture, do you find your messages are correctly interpreted? For a picture captures a snapshot of a story which is set up to subjective response. And I was curious about the exact same thing and was going to ask you about it if we have time, because in any art form, it could be TV or film or stand-up comedy, there is always this distinction. I mean, advocacy for that matter, there's always this distinction between intent and impact. And you might be intending to convey some message, but you might also be able to foresee that many people are going to be bringing their own biases and ignorance to the experience and might project a bunch of stuff that was unintended. And how much do you try to anticipate and correct for that in the way that you create your work? How do you think about that? And I'm going to get my dog a treat so he shuts up while you talk.
Okay. Well, I can only control that to an extent, and I've had to let go of the stress of that. A while back, I would like everyone to understand the images as I have shot it, with the intent that I have. People are going to use my images in all sorts of ways. Hey, buddy. Hi. And some of my images are very explicit in their meaning and in what is happening. I can give an example of a rabbit who is next in line for slaughter. And in the foreground, you see the rabbit with their ears back, and they are clearly distressed. And in the background, you see all the rabbits hanging upside down. That is a fairly clear image, not so open to interpretation. Some of my animal portraits, though, might require some hand-holding and some narrative, some storytelling, and some explanation. So I do my best to do that with We Animals Media. We caption things carefully. We screen who is using the images, but we can only screen so much. I mean, my images are out there seen by the millions every single day. So,
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And sorry now for the chewing sound. Okay, also a really interesting question from Dennis that in a way follows up on one of our earlier conversations. Photographing human suffering seems replete with ethical considerations that can, with good reason, prevent photographs from being taken. So what, if any, are the ethical considerations that animal documentary photographers work with that might do the same. And the version of the question that I was hoping to ask if there was time was, are there situations where you feel it would be in any way like objectifying or exploitative or like a violation of the dignity of the animal to capture a difficult or private moment of theirs to use it for a political aim, even if the political aim is animal advocacy? Is there something questionable there? Certainly there would be in the case of certain types of human suffering. And so how do you think about that issue in the non-human case?
Do I ever think about it? I've had a long time to think about it, and decide again and again and again with every shoot that I do that it's something that I have to live with, and it's something that needs to be done. I'm recalling being at an outdoor slaughterhouse where the goats and the cows were being led to the kill floor, and with their legs tied, flipped onto their sides, and I'm there in front of them as their necks are being slit, and I am photographing them as they bleed out and as they kick and as they try and scream, but they can't. Would I be put in jail for doing that? Would I be tried for war crimes if I was photographing a human in that situation? Probably.
Yeah.
And but it's different. It's different because this is, for lots of reasons. I mean, this is going to be going on in every country every day, and people need to see. There's going to be a natural outcry from people if this is happening to people, but that's not happening at all with non-human animals. I mean, these stories are completely silenced. They need to be told. It is really, really something to be with animals in such an intimate moment. I am with them at their most vulnerable, and when they're experiencing like the most pain and fear that possibly they will ever experience, and to be there not intervening is something that war photographers, conflict photographers, and APJs have to bear.
Another angle of this question is what, if any, are the differences between human and non-human minds that might warrant different treatments of human sufferers and non-human sufferers? For example, humans have a certain kind of self-awareness that makes us aware of how we see ourselves, how other people see us, and we take interest in other people seeing us in a certain way, and those interests might be harmed or set back if we are captured in a certain kind of vulnerable moment. And then we have to ask, how much is that why we would be not taking that photograph in the human case, and how much does that extend to the non-human case? And just to briefly address that, we do tend to, because of speciesism, think of non-human animals as less cognitively sophisticated than they are, but many animals do have a certain kind of self-awareness that we need to take seriously. With that said, they probably are a little bit less self-obsessed and like image obsessed than we are, and they might not care as much about how they are depicted in photographs or newspaper stories. And just one final thing to say is there's interesting philosophical work about the notion of non-human dignity. And I would in particular recommend Laurie Gruent's work on non-human dignity. She has this really, I think, helpful relational analysis where to treat an animal with dignity is to treat them in ways that would cause yourself and other people viewing this interaction to have positive perceptions of the animals as worthy of respect and compassion, rather than negative perceptions of the animals as worthy here for our exploitation or extermination. And I think a case can be made that your photography would be an invitation for people to see animals as worthy of respect and compassion, in that sense would be compatible with their dignity. But whether Laurie would analyze it the same way is of course not my thing to say, but but I think it's a really, really useful frame.
Laurie actually wrote the introduction
ahead.
for my book Captive. So she and I,
oh, nice.
She and I are on similar pages.
On the same page about this. Yeah, I would expect that. Okay, Andy asks, do you have any plans to collaborate on a future publication? I don't know, what do you think? Do you want to write something?
You and I?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, when we talked a week ago, we talked about maybe writing something on animal photojournalism and interviewing.
That's true.
APJs. Right out of reach is my book called Conflict Photography, and it's a series of interviews about the hows and whys. I find this very exciting. like whatever we can do to encourage more people to understand it and to do it. Yeah. As for other publications, I mean, Jeff and I think ongoing, we'll be working on our own books. I have something coming out with Martin Rowe in a few months, and now that We Animals Media has published this big beast, Hidden Animals in the Anthropocene, people keep coming to us and saying, "Hey, will you publish this? Will you publish that?" Bandwidth.
Wow, awesome.
We need
Nice
people, bandwidth, money. Like, help.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I'm probably going to follow up with you about that idea, and Andy, we'll try to remember to put you in the acknowledgements when we eventually put it out. Okay, Elizabeth asks, thank you so much for your time today. I wanted to ask about the animal rights situation in the UK. I noticed the UK doesn't feature much in Hidden, and wondered whether there are logistical reasons for this, or whether you have any thoughts about UK's approach to animal welfare.
There's so much going on in the UK. My co-editor Keith is from the UK, and our colorist Britta Yashinsky is from the UK, and I think we do actually have images from the UK in there, but you know, lots of countries, very few pages, and so it became very much about the narrative. Every page has to flow one to the next, so geography became less and less of a consideration. The quality of the image had to trump geography. So, but I mean, it is a global book. It's 40 global photographers, and we've got images from everywhere except for the Antarctic.
Got it. Okay.
And there's so much activism going on in the UK. Like, it's just such a fabulous place for every type of animal-related advocacy. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we have time for one more quick question, and then we have to bring it to a close. So with apologies to everyone else, and maybe we can get a printout of the questions so we can check them out later. Here's a question from Alex. I'm interested to know your opinions or dealings with zoos. I'm an ethnographer working on the cultural influences on animal feeding in zoos. Do zoos have a role in your hoped for world of human-animal interactions?
Yeah, the way I address that in my book called Captive, which looks at zoos and aquaria on 5 continents, is that zoos are an evolving place, as they should be. I think that we should largely be moving away from the current models. We should definitely be moving away from roadside zoos and all of these really subpar places. But, you know, a lot of these facilities have a lot of funding and can contribute well to conservation. So how can these places evolve? There's always going to be a need for a space to care for animals, not put them on display, but to actually care for them. And so they can become wildlife centers and actual conservation spaces. These places can be reconfigured with the well-being of the animal first and foremost, instead of our entertainment. What do you think, Jeff?
Agreed. Yeah, perfectly said. The main thing I would add is that this is a work in progress. Right now, there are very few spaces that can be good for non-human animals, because we have constructed a world that is really meant not only for humans, but for like a privileged few humans. And right now, most captive spaces are not really accommodating for animals. Most wild spaces are not really accommodating for animals. And so the challenge has to be building new future spaces that can be more accommodating for animals, at least better than current captive and wild spaces. And I think that the kind of sanctuary that you describe is the right approach. And with that, we are unfortunately out of time.